So I'm Joel Stradling, and I'm the lead analyst and founder of Clavem Research. My presentation now is going to be about SD-WAN underpinning the evolution to Industry 4.0. So for the next sort of 15 minutes or so, with some time tagged on the end for questions, first of all, I'll start with the definition of what do I mean by Industry 4.0. Then I'll look at challenges within the manufacturing industry, so it's very vertical specific. Then the transition to SD-WAN for manufacturers, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Clavem Research SD-WAN verticals coverage, which is a body of research that we've been building that looks at SD-WAN according to industry-specific verticals. So we have manufacturing, healthcare, retail, and banking and finance. Then there's a little bit about server provider resources and how service providers are, actually targeting dedicated manufacturing solutions based on their SD-WAN technology. A short bit on some customer references where I'm looking at some examples of service providers and what they're doing with SD-WAN for manufacturers, and then to wrap up with some conclusions and recommendations. So just super quickly on this slide, what is Industry 4.0? At its most simple premise, that's the connected factory. So machines within the factory and throughout the factory floor and plant have sensors inside them, whether that's for tolerance, for temperature, or cameras. And they are actually connected wirelessly to the overall system. And that system, what we're seeing now is it's a management system, so that the technicians that are responsible for that factory floor can visualize the production and act intelligently in real time, either with the technician intervention or the network itself. As we move to autonomous networking and intent-based networking, will adjust and react in real time to the needs of that factory production batch. So this slide sort of captures the intersection of Industry 4.0 with software-defined wide area networks. As mentioned in the previous slide, so IoT and autonomous networks or autonomous networking are, I guess, the fundamental pillars that would support a connected factory. And just sort of moving around clockwise, the top bit is about dynamic networks and network as a service for autonomous networking and the connected sensors. And then moving to the right, it's about the app and moving more to the cloud. So the autonomous networking should support, for example, SCADA industrial control systems. And the policies that SD-WAN enables to be set are more around business outcomes, as opposed to, in the traditional legacy WAN world, it was all about speeds and feeds. You'd get an SLA that would be based on network availability, latencies, and so on. All that stuff is still important, but the discussion today is more about the business outcome. And can the end user prioritize, for example, traffic by application or user, and that application is becoming increasingly, sophisticated and demanding. Running off the back of the panel discussion we just had, when you look towards edge compute and 5G. The apps that support those solutions are quite demanding. Security is never far away from any discussion, and on that side we see SD-WAN providing certain security features and mechanisms that are very helpful for factories and for manufacturers. That could be security virtual network functions that can be spun up very quickly and deployed consistently, for example, across a global scale. There might be 50 factories across 10 countries, and the IT manager, through that single pane control or dashboard for the SD-WAN management, can deploy a new security virtualized network function in theory pretty quickly and consistently across the network. AI and big data analytics is becoming more important, and SD-WAN needs to sort of underpin those environments. And again, when you look at AI and big data analytics in a factory environment, it starts to move towards the edge compute for those things taking place, where latency is very important. And it'd be very hard to manage the network and do the slicing without having an SD-WAN implementation in place, because without it, or on a legacy WAN, you're limited to far more manual, old school, way of doing those things. And that portal aspect I mentioned, again, that's the management aspect, where we're seeing SD-WAN services and the dashboards that come with them offering a lot of self-serve opportunities to the customers that deploy them. Through that portal, we're seeing, I think, a lot of development in that area in the user interface. So service providers are seeking to innovate and differentiate one against the other by, investing in the user interface and all those different self-serve features. So that should provide, a looking glass into the network health and opportunities to manage that. If parts of the network look to be degraded or more bandwidth or prioritizing of certain apps and users is required, then that should be, achievable through that customer portal. And this slide is sort of, the next two slides really capture some of the unique requirements of the sectors that I have been looking at in my research. It should be mentioned that SD-WAN, so far from what I've seen, looking at the service providers, doesn't tend to be different according to verticals. Those products are generic. When you look at Verizon or BT or OBS or Colt and so on, they don't tend to segment the SD-WAN offering according to verticals. It's a sort of generic proposition. However, when it's applied to the certain industries that you see here, for example, manufacturing, then the way that SD-WAN is deployed and the problems it's looking to solve does vary considerably based on those requirements. So it's quite a long text-heavy slide, so I won't read through that. But on the manufacturing side, I've seen in the use cases, they are quite obsessed with things like supply chain accuracy, stock and supplier management, getting products to market quickly and plant retooling. They're all very important aspects. And if the IT team is focusing on kind of connectivity issues or sorting out network problems, then they're actually not freeing up their IT team to focus on other things like improving manufacturing processes and technologies and having a network that sort of works for the manufacturer as opposed to against. And in the use case, I'll sort of circle back to that one that's coming up on the next slide. In healthcare, again, there's a whole bunch of stuff there that you can see that the players within that sector are looking at for their own digital transformation, immersive experiences, virtual reality and augmented reality, mobile clinics and MRIs, being able to share imaging. I was speaking with Adrian Comley from BT just this morning about the 5G ambulance where the medic has an ultrasound glove that he can pass over the patient. This is, of course, in the ambulance, and then the images are real-time fed back to the surgeon or doctor in a hospital somewhere to provide advice, in emergency situations. And I think Vodafone and Juniper also demonstrated a 5G ambulance at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona earlier this year. So, and there's a whole bunch more things there that's going on in healthcare. Maybe I could just highlight that medical device one there. Security of health data and medical device IoT, basically it's scary. Similar to securing SCADA systems, where you've got antiquated systems and IoT sensors, they're notoriously easy to hack, notoriously difficult to know that they've actually been compromised, and once they have been compromised, very difficult to fix. And when it comes to medical device IoT, that it becomes, the health and safety of a patient comes to the fore, and it's critical. So, the players within these industries are looking towards SD-WAN to help them move along these paths towards digital transformation and adopt these next technical, capabilities and new solutions. Again, another pretty text-heavy slide, so I'll kind of move on quickly from this. The slides will be available after this, that's no problem. But looking at retail and banking and finance, again, those are some of the digital transformation areas that the businesses within those particular segments are really focused on. And I think, when you match up as a service provider, the SD-WAN capabilities, they should be looking to solve, those types of problems and present customers with opportunities to transform in those ways. So going back to the Industry 4.0, I kind of went off a little bit into the healthcare and retail and so on, but getting back on track to the manufacturing, these are the current challenges that manufacturers face. SD-WAN, very nice, but really these are the things that they're facing. Antiquated industrial systems. Admittedly, those industrial systems, the management is moving to online, but that also causes some fear and uncertainty and risk with cybersecurity. So the SCADA control systems are very old, and managing them could raise security risks, and they're looking for solutions to make sure that their factories are secure. And I mentioned the point about how easy it is to hack dumb sensors in industrial IoT. The legacy IT and networks are already in place, so your IT manager for a manufacturing site, he can't just switch off the legacy one day and move to the SD-WAN the next. There has to be a transition and an interworking and a migration path. And then the last bit, those IT managers with all those things on their plate in the manufacturing environment, their IT spend is being crunched and pressed by the board, who are saying, well, we need the IT spend or OPEX bit needs to be 1% of our overall OPEX or things like that. So if a network transformation is to take place, it really does have to be blessed and supported by people across that business and from the board. And from qualitative research that we have done at Clavem Research, we know that the move to SD-WAN is not easy. When enterprises have tried to do it by themselves, many of them have encountered difficulties and become stuck, and then gone to look for the support of a managed service provider that can provide some consulting and advisory to do that. So that actual transition phase from the legacy WAN over to a software-defined wide area network needs to be approached quite carefully with caution, and maybe taking a few steps back and looking at the overall business plan, and maybe some of the existing LAN infrastructure needs to be ripped out and changed. And so doing it yourself, some companies can do that. They can go to Silver Peak and Riverbed and others and stitch together a solution, and that's fine. And then we're seeing, a sweet spot for service providers that are experienced with that and know how to take customers on a transition path. And I'm thinking about the large global providers that I've mentioned already, like Verizon, AT&T, BT, OBS, and so on. And increasingly, some of the SIs, systems integrators, are there to provide support for a transition to an SD-WAN, example being HCL. So this is just a quick snapshot of the research that we have on site. So we've built this SD-WAN verticals, leaderboard concept. That's the Excel output, where we're looking at innovation on that vertical axis and then maturity and traction there. And that's what it looks like for the US market. You could see Masergy and Ariaka, Verizon, pretty high up there in terms of innovation. AT&T, very well entrenched. Overall, the US market is very advanced. So anybody that's kind of above the midpoint there is innovative. They have an innovative solution. And sorry, I didn't hear that. There are two sides to it. On the one hand was the innovation of their SD-WAN itself, looking across the whole service wrap, so what's in the portal, as well as the actual portfolio itself. And then the other side is how they're enabling manufacturers to be innovative. So I have this convoluted, I admit, scorecard system that I've used for rating the operators and given them percentages for each, and part of that has included use cases. And so, for Ariaka, they've built quite a proprietary, data compression platform over the internet, and I think that they're innovative. They have a good resource for manufacturers, and it's sort of an infographic that explains how their SD-WAN can support data analytics and things like that. On the maturity and traction, it's a great question because a lot of the operators didn't like that I was asking them stuff, because I asked them for revenues for SD-WAN. I asked them for SD-WAN endpoints supporting manufacturers. I didn't get that information, but I did get, from when their first SD-WAN was launched. Most of them launched Cisco IWAN around 2016, 2017. Ariaka and Masergy, again, were sort of a little bit earlier than that with their SD-WAN innovation. To a degree, the innovation too, I looked at marketing messages. What are they doing in automotive and so on? Have they provided evidence of their SD-WAN enabling some of those vertical industries with resource, whether that's thought leadership and white paper? And similarly for the market traction and maturity, what does their existing traction within those segments look like? So, but the methodology is pretty complicated, and at the end of the day, it's not a science; it's my opinion. It's important to get that right. But yeah, so it's helpful to call out some leaders and followers that I've mentioned there, and you can see some operators are quite happy to be transparent with their market penetration. Ariaka, quite happy to say we've got 800 customers. Of course, that's all SD-WAN because that's the only thing they do. Windstream, 1,000 SD-WAN concierge clients, which is their sort of dashboard. And then, just a capture on the US. But the SD-WAN verticals also covers Europe, a global class, and Asia-Pac. So, and across different verticals. But it's still under production. I've only finished the manufacturing part. So, the last two slides I have are around the use cases, and I think I mentioned Ariaka, and they spoke about this UK-based industrial thread business. And this was all about streamlining performance of business applications. And so the traffic is automatically routed over Ariaka's private managed SD-WAN. And the company itself experienced quite tremendous performance improvements with that. And then they are also able to very easily and quickly integrate Zscaler cloud security to provide that protection for cloud services. Again, it's kind of quite basic stuff. It's not like a rocket science innovative leap here for an SD-WAN implementation. But one thing I've seen doing interviews with the buy side, so manufacturers or other verticals that have adopted SD-WAN, is pretty much across the board they're delighted with the technology. They're really satisfied, which is unusual for new tech, right? Some in our industry, some of the technologies that have been quite new and launched have, bombed pretty badly. But SD-WAN seems to be doing very well. And this is another one that I liked, Windstream Enterprise. Its client that it references is Liberty Steel in the US. And again, the highlights of this for me are the SD-WAN prioritizing important apps, the fact that there's that load balancing and circuit failure, so the traffic automatically reroutes. And this particular client just said, very honestly, we report 0 site downtime in the past calendar year. And before that, for this client, that wasn't the case. They had network outages, and so their IT people were focused on that. But now, instead of that, at that top point, their IT staff can spend time on strategically important stuff, like improving the manufacturing technology and processes. So that's actually my final slide, and I see I've got 2 minutes. I was planning to leave more for Q&A at the back end, but just tell me when you've done that picture, then I'll move on. You're welcome. I'll be happy to share the slides. It's no problem. So just in conclusion here, SD-WAN, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's a very compelling technology. That centralized management and control of industrial networks that you can visualize, I think it's a technology imperative for moving to Industry 4.0. The clear views that you can get through portals and the dashboards from all the providers I've looked at, they're pretty sophisticated in terms of what they allow the end user to do. Then the last 2 bullets here, and it's kind of recapping and just going over the points I've made. Migration must be in sensible steps. My recommendation is always to start small, try and break it, and then move on to a wider deployment. And then the last point is actually to the service providers themselves. I think they need to provide ample resources that are vertical specific to educate the end users on what they might be able to achieve in their manufacturing environments through SD-WAN deployment, and just participate in the industry bodies to share knowledge and thought leadership and approach sort of standardization and certification, along the lines of the work that the MEF is doing, for example, and other groups like ONUG. Just to sort of educate and share and allow the manufacturers to improve. I don't think it should be really so closed. It should be a collaborative effort. Even though the providers compete one against the other, it's good for the industry as a whole to share that thought leadership and knowledge. And that's all I had. I've got 20 seconds left. I'd be quite happy to take any questions, or we'll move on to the next session, which I'm not sure what that is. Yes. Do you want to? Oh, the mic's coming. If you don't mind saying your name and company, please.
Yeah, Jim St. Ledger from Intel. Joel, you mentioned sort of implementing or transitioning to SD-WAN, having some layer of complexity and recommendation that they work with an integrator or someone. Can you speak a little, your knowledge on what that transition looks like, what the costs of that transition might be, and then what sort of the payback time may be? Your last one on Liberty Steel looked tremendously compelling from a standpoint of almost 90% reduction and almost zero downtime. So whatever it costs them to put it in, versus what they had before, where is their break even, that kind of business analysis, if you could.
Yeah, that's around TCO, right? That sort of investment recuperation. I don't have a handle on that because it's really hard to get pricing for enterprise SD-WAN services. It's always a negotiation. In terms of what it looks like, from speaking with adopters of the technology, the ones that have tried to do it themselves got into trouble, and I think they spent more money. I think there are hidden costs with the DIY route, although I have spoken with some that were perfectly happy with that. And that's where they've gone with the Silver Peak. So there's this sort of dynamic with it. To me, it depends on what the IT department looks like. If they understand, if they have the skill sets to do that type of thing, then they might be able to make a saving by doing it that DIY. In terms of budgeting, I'm seeing, and the US market's really competitive, and you saw from the graphic how many competitors there are in Europe. You don't have so many per country. We're seeing as a service, that the utility priced concept is starting to creep in more and more. It does strike me that the deployment of the SD-WAN isn't necessarily cheap in the beginning. It does strike me that they do tend to save some money on broadband costs. So they tend to buy slightly less MPLS to get that load balancing and 1+1 circuitry. They tend to add broadband links, and that becomes the failover circuit. I'm sorry I don't have an accurate specific number that I can put on that, but I think over time it does give them, some of the companies in the US actually have TCO calculators.
Right.
You can go in there and pursue it to the end and it'll give you sort of an estimate. I wouldn't like to stand here and say, oh, you'll save 70%. Companies like Ariaka do that, but they're kind of trying to kill MPLS. You've got that, that dynamic going on where you see some pretty, I think, exaggerated cost savings comments just, bandied around.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for joining my session.